shaking up family structures because you were calling forth parents to be attentive to the things that were taking place. I saw a commercial the other day, and it was Beyonce on tour, and she was projecting a message on stage, and it was saying that it was talking about mind control, right? And it was saying that media, he who controls the media controls the mind, and we know where these ethos and these themes come from. But at the same time, as she is putting people under a state of mind control, she's telling them about mind control, and we and that's the Hegelian dialect right there. So we see the effectiveness of these techniques that, again, not too long ago you were pointing them out, and there wasn't that much, you know, real time data to weigh it against. But now it seems to be everywhere, and it's on the tongue of people, conversing about what they're conversing about. In the state of Florida that you are in, there seems to be a political uproar pushing back against this level of programming. Can you speak on that? Where this conversation has taken itself, the political climate around it, the fact that it's now a global conversation, and what are the ramifications moving forward as we as a people are attempting, to position ourselves for a continuity of our bloodline, of our species. Is the species on the ropes? Is there more of a sinister underlying agenda at play to knock us really out the box?
Yes, you hit it right on the head. There has been a plan in place for the last 100 years, first of all, to essentially destroy the United States from within. Back in the day, say in the late 80s, going into the 90s, after, especially during the 90s, when Oprah ascended the throne, so to speak, of feminism, um,
Hmm.
I was the countermeasure. I became the countermeasure to that, and was attacked a lot by our sisters and some men, not realizing that in my book, The Wounded Womb, I began to put down all of what I foresaw the empowerment of women. Not I don't call it empowerment. I call what's happening to women today is the weaponization of women. And
Yes.
when you give certain powers to a woman without any responsibility for the not the best parts of them, but the worst parts of them, what then there's an underlying current of control. There are puppet masters that are essentially using what would be the worst of what women really represent when given power. And that then began to undermine the authority, the primary authority of the man, which was essentially a tactical strategy that Sun Tzu spoke about when you wanted to destroy a more powerful enemy. When you want to destroy a more powerful enemy, you attack the men. But if the men are powerful, you can't take your army to them. You have to beat them before you even field your army. So, how do you do
Hmm.
that? Well, you weaponize the system that they presently are under by infiltrating that system. And what you do is essentially get into the places of political power, which they did, and begin to weaponize using women. Because remember, it was Rockefeller who funded the feminist movement. It was Rockefeller
Hmm.
himself who did it. He is the one who actually backed Ms. Magazine. And the proponents of that would be, what's her name, Steinem, Audre
Right.
Lorde, and the rest of them. And what they did was they gave the mistrust. They began to weaponize mistrust in women, and they needed someone to cross the color line in order for that particular message that white women had with their men. They had to make sure that they engendered that same conversation in black women against their men. So what happened
Right.
is during the time that I was, researching this and putting the book "The Wounded Womb" together, uh, it began to dawn on me that the weaponization of women to offset, which is essentially the secondary authority, to subsume the first or the primary authority, was part of the strategy and giving them political power so that emotions actually was what would then uh, predicate all decisions made. So what you looked at right then, if you saw me, because I was really castigated for this, I said that once you empower feminism, you're going to empower homosexuality. And right after that, when the women began to get powerful in Congress, they began to push legislation for homosexual powers or to bring it to the surface and weaponize that. So the two of them together began to weaponize all of what was the worst parts. Then the economy, because men were actually losing their jobs, since those who essentially ran the infrastructure of commerce began to ship their manufacturing overseas, and then
Hmm.
took the middle class out of the equation, especially men.
Yes.
When they did that, the men began to now be powerless because they couldn't take care of their families. And then we began to see a lot of single parents, women who are having children without wedding. Everything was destroyed. Now you're seeing it
Yeah.
happen today in Congress. You're watching watching the schools be infiltrated by the very thing that I was telling everybody would happen, the schools, and they would go after your children. I even said they would go after your children. I said that 20 years ago. That's the next step. I said right
Yeah.
after they give homosexual agenda a power base, you're going to watch the pedophiles. And sure enough, right after that, then
Yes.
they
You
began to say they began to
these.
restructure psychology and the psychiatry and say that it's no longer pedophilia is a mental disease, it's a preference. So
Let
those
me
who are
speak on your
controlling it,
behalf,
yeah,
um,
sexual
beloved,
preference.
please. Because when you were attempting to have these conversations with the community, once again, I was in the rooms that people walked out of because they said it was uncomfortable. They said it was too graphic. You were speaking about pedophilia before it was mainstream news. This was
Mhm.
pre-Epstein, before it was on the tongues and the lips of the general populace. You been was sounding the alarm. You been was talking about they're gonna attempt to change the classification in the mental clinics to normalize this behavior and put it as a subgenre underneath homosexuality. You been
Mhm.
said that, you know what I'm saying? And people were very uncomfortable. But now look at where we're at,
Yeah,
right? Where it seems to be off the guardrails. Nobody can explain why they can't press up or put a stop to this legislation. Once again, it seems to be contradictory because people still believe that this is a Christian country. You feel me? And I asked a
Mhm.
question, or a question was asked of me yesterday, and I made a comment, and it was like, well, the question that was never asked of us in the conscious community are what are our politics?
Mhm.
You know, does consciousness teeter more on the lines of conservatism, or does it teeter more on the lines of liberalism? Or is that where the branch breaks and you get woke versus consciousness? Because consciousness seems to teeter more on conservatism because we are still adherents to upholding, building black family structures in order to rebuild a
There you
nation.
go. There you go.
Those
We've
things
always
are,
been conservative. We've
yeah,
always been
yeah,
conservative.
that's
We were always
inexcusable. You
Republican.
can't throw that out.
Yeah, we were first Republicans before we were turned into Democrats, and that was your boy. What's his name? President Johnson. After they killed
Johnson,
Kennedy,
right?
it was President Johnson who signed in the
Yeah, the
Civil
Great
Rights Act. And he
Society.
said,
Yeah,
yeah, and he said that as he wrote that, he said, "I'll have these NIGGAs voting Democrats for the
Democrat,
next
right,
200 years."
right. That's when the Dixiecrats slipped in, and he brought the
It was
Great
the
Society.
KKK.
It
Yeah,
was
the
their
KKK.
socialist program of, yeah, of that time, and that's where welfare. That's where Head Start comes from. That's where the WIC program comes from. That's where
That's when the
Medicaid
abortion
comes from.
clinics came up. The
That's where
abortion clinics
that's where the
came up in
abortion
the same
clinics
way.
came, right?
Family planning.
So yeah, and then all of this coming out of the 1964 report from Patrick Moynihan called the Negro Family, the PDF, that was profound and precedent in terms of them saying this is when the Democrats wiped their hands. And they
Hmm
said, look, these people are incapable of upward mobility. They said they don't even control the dope. They don't even control their own underworld. And they said that they are going to be a societal detriment being raised by mothers. They said any society that is raised by mothers alone, we have to write that society off because inherently that society will not advance forward. So they closed the books on us At the same time that they was bringing in the so-called Great Society, and
Well, you know, the
we
Germans themselves copied us. The Germans copied their
and they said
genocidal
that.
protocols after what we did here. And you got to remember too, it was Bill
Hmm.
Gates' father that ran family planning after it was established. So
Hmm.
everything that you're looking at right now, they were all what do you call eugenicists. And this
Oh,
guy
Genesis,
that's running the WEF today, Klaus Schwab, his father
well,
ran the eugenics society there in Germany, where Adolf Hitler made his father the gave his father the ownership for setting up the particular criteria for the genocidal protocols they were going to practice. So Klaus Schwab's father was a Nazi, and he's now the one that's behind the WEF that's getting ready to drop what you're seeing today. This incredible amount of uh, uh, what you call it marginalization of your finances is going to be on that blockchain, and that's why I say people need. This is what you call a compelled benefit. You have no choice in this, so it's time for you to understand how to survive this particular shift by getting into XRP, buying gold, silver, and
right,
getting substantial materials. Just do what the banks are doing right now.
right, and we have roughly less than a month now, because it's on schedule to begin in July. Um, again, you've been sounding the clarion call. Shout out to Novatech. I got into Novatech as well. You know what I'm saying? What day are you doing this webinar? What day are you doing your seminar? How can they
Yeah,
tap in? How can
um,
they get this information? 'Cause time is,
I
getting
appreciate
thin.
that. I appreciate that. I The webinar will be on the 25th, and we're starting at 2 p.m. because it's going to be a lot. It's going to be at least 10 hours. Uh, Before the
Hmm.
15th of this month, I'm telling you, it's going to be profound the amount of information. I just was saying,
One of them joints.
should I capsulate it? Should I shut it down and say, no, I can't take these people past 5 or 6 or 8 hours? No, there's too much for me to give to you in this particular webinar right now because so much has been suppressed. And I can't trust that I'll be here after this and what is going to happen after July. So this particular program may be the last that I do. And I know I always say that because essentially it is looming that way. So on the 25th of this month, before the 15th, because that's when the discount price is in right now. At the 15th, it goes back to its regular price. But like I was
Mhm.
saying, there's so much, you have no idea how much has to be actually reckoned with because they're not teaching you what I'm going to give you in schools. I'm going to expose Einstein. I'm going to expose everyone, all of them, the astronauts, NOTS, and all the rest of them that have been actually bamboozling the people. NASA is lies. This is this is the greatest storyteller ever told. They're liars. The universe as you know it, reality as you know it, does not work that way. They know what time it is. You don't. So what's getting ready to happen at this point is if you don't understand what they have planned for you in the future, when it drops, and it's going to drop as a gigantic light show, when it drops, you're not going to be ready for it, or those who are in the conscious community will have some kind of idea of what it is that they had planned, like Blue Beam, and what it is that was said in the progression that would bring them ever more control because you have to have the chaos before control. And if you remember, Get Smart was dealing with chaos and control. So you have
Mhm.
to understand that the chaos they're about to deal with is them setting up the necessary type of chaos for them to gain more control over you. If you're not prepared for what time it is, if you don't understand how the plan and how the script has been written, and why it is that there's so many clueless people following along, because ain't nobody that is into this illusion that's fighting against the truth, because truth again we say has three three stages. It's ridiculed, persecuted, and then accepted as a matter of fact reality. And that's essentially where we are right now. It's persecuted at this point. So you have to understand in the persecution, that's the crucible. Ignorance was created specifically by the Creator so that in the knowing that you acquire, the knowing then is given to the Creator. The Creator is all. So the all can't know itself. It only has to retract upon itself. And in that subtraction of itself, it goes to sleep. And we are the dream of the Creator, knowing itself. I know it sounds crazy, but if you understand it like we do, my students do in the classes, you'll
Nope.
understand what I'm talking about. So please understand that I'm not giving, I'm not going to give you doom and gloom only. I'm going to open your eyes to exactly what you need to make a good decision, a logical decision of how you want your life to be from this point forward. And the first illusion, the first lie that they perpetrated on us was the heliocentric hoax. That's the mother of all conspiracies. From there, every other conspiracy had been grown because they destroyed tens of thousands of years of what we called astrotheological science. For instance, I'm going to use a lot of what the Bible has to say. Why? Because you know that I broke down the Bible ace deuce tray, and I've always said to young brothers and sisters that the Bible essentially was a book of science that they turned into a book of prose. And what they've done is they've hidden scientific truths about you being the ultimate technology of God. What the so-called satanic energy is to put you into an artificial based consciousness system, which they call AI or artificial intelligence, and I call it atrocious forming intelligence, and that you have to understand what it is they're getting ready to do. They don't have the ability to time travel using this technology. They don't have the ability to leave the body and travel through what they call the universe, or what we call the omniverse, and visit other domed realities beyond ours, where there are other entities that live beyond the Arctic. We are under the dome, but there are different ways for portals for us to go through to visit other domed realities, species, and that's what Admiral Byrd found out when he ended up by the ending part of the dome. And we're going to show you that the dome is real because the U.S. military affirmed it, and all of the so-called scriptures that were essentially now saying, oh, it's just religion, it's just beliefs. No, the Bible was turned into a belief system. It was also, it was in the primary stages of it, was they were taking different scientific theses that they called epistles.
Hmm.
And these epistles and so called parables were actually scientific theses the way we taught it. See, we didn't estrange ourselves from nature and put up a whole lot of chicken scratch and call that quantum reality. We brought ourselves into nature knowing that we were a part of it. So the European man, he has what I call, when he observes something in his early stages of taking or stealing the sciences of the ancients, he then grew an ego that allowed him to actually become something called use his brain to do something that I call impositional analysis. Now, what is impositional analysis? I call it impositional analysis because he would impose his perception of what was real upon the thing that he was actually investigating. So he
Hmm.
would give names and give
His name.
attitudes and put his own name. Just imagine you're cutting
Look,
open, yeah, you're cutting open a person, a human being, and then giving your name to certain parts of the
let
organ
me let
body.
me give you an example, right? I was watching a special on Netflix called Chimp Empire,
Hmm.
right? And the European has an entire narrative and script. He named each one of these chimps, right? He played it out like it was a reality show. This is
Mhm.
what this one is thinking. This is what this one is doing. They wanted to knock the alpha off.
Yeah.
The alpha had relationships with these women. This is how they got along. And I'm like, are they communicating with the chimps? How are they interpreting
No, he's
all of these
identifying with the
things?
chimps. No, he's
He went to
identifying with them.
GPT and created a script
Mhm.
and then plays the script out and just uses role acting to
He's
act out a
identifying.
script. And that's the same thing that he does. That's the same thing he's doing with dinosaurs. He's just in his imagination.
Hmm.
And the Western man is telling you we don't know how the mind operates because they haven't deciphered or decoded the brain. So again, I've been baffled because I've been asking people, how are you listening to someone who only operates out of one hemisphere of their brain, where they tell you we don't acknowledge Eastern spirituality, even though they, adhere
They
to
twisted
Eastern
it.
religion, right,
Yeah.
through a Western
Hmm.
lens, but that lens is not incorporating hemisync. They're not operating out of both hemispheres of their brain or both hemispheres of the planet. So something is always being suppressed,
Hmm.
right? There's always a truth that's unattainable to them because they don't deal with spirituality. They don't deal with right hemisphere, divine feminine principles or energy or perspectives. Why are we following Cyclops?
Yeah, well, essentially, you have to look at the fact that the paradigm under which we are functioning was set by him. Like I said, his is impositional analysis. He puts his own perception on it and then identifies himself through what he perceives to be real. He's now waking up slowly, but we have to remember how our scientists worked. Where he worked through impositional analysis, we worked through intuitional analysis.
Hmm.
So we waited, we did not identify that person or those things that we were studying through the lens that the European did and imposed his will upon what that is. We waited for the thing to identify itself. And in that, you'll see that the way we represented our sciences was not in some abstract chicken scratch that they call quantum science and physics and all of the nonsense they write on the board that takes up an entire chalkboard. All we had to do was to wait until it was identified, and through our envisioning, we would then understand what that particular animal meant, what this meant, what that meant. And that's why we always used animals because they were the school that taught us. Animals teach us because they don't come out of, in the wild, they don't come out of their own instincts. And when the great, the ones who are ancient people, we used to study the animals because they had particular personalities that we then affixed to ours. And so throughout, if you look at the pantheon of ancient Chem, these animals that you see, the ibis, the alligator, the hippopotamus, the
Or the
hawk,
baboon.
all of
Right.
these, right, had representations of what we were. We did not estrange ourselves from nature. We invited it into our analysis. And so now we're seeing him trying to get real close because you see his scientists now are backing away from the old systems and trying to get into the consciousness of the animals. And now you'll see the animals are actually acting the way they did with us. That's why Haile Selassie could sit with two lions on his throne as
Hmm.
pets because we had the language. That's why the so-called Aborigines of Australia knew the language of the kangaroo they called them or the hawk, and the reason why the European actually had the chance to conquer Australia was because one of the natives gave them the secrets because they couldn't find food, they couldn't do anything, and they found out that the eagle would warn the kangaroo when the European came close.
Mm.
So they started killing the eagles in Australia. So
Mm.
that's the way the European got in. So there's a lot of things that we're
Mm.
not teaching our people because we're too busy with these things that essentially are taking away our perception and consciousness and focus. And instead of dealing with the original technology that the ancients have taught us, especially as it lives today in the Dravidian cultures, we don't have an empathetic connection to humans. We don't have an empathetic connection to life itself.
The
And
nature.
so when I begin to speak about in the webinar about how indoctrinated we have to first diffuse whatever that light is that they dimmed inside of us. We have to take out the blinding light of ignorance that had indoctrinated into us, and we have to study how deep the indoctrination goes in the first part of my lecture, and then we're going to get into the meat of the matter. There's a lot of reading that I'm going to put in. There's a lot of 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 um, webinars, videos that I
True.
found on the web that I'm going to introduce as part of the lesson plan, so that it's going to be something. I mean, I'm going to say to you, if the audience, when you do, if you do come, and I do suggest that you do, um, please make sure that you could take snapshots. I don't like anybody, taking my work and using it, to pay their rent with and so forth. Please don't do that. It takes me months. It took me 4 months to put this particular program together for you. All right. So I'm just here to guide the way. So what I would like you to do, there's certain snapshots you could take of your screen so that you can have for your own personal records, to teach your children, to have to discuss and so forth. I've put a lot of effort into this particular lecture, and you're going to see it. And prepare also. Don't eat too heavy. Take your juice plus. Drink a lot of water, because you're going to be at that screen and you're going to be paying attention for at least, I would say, 8 to 11 hours.
Mm. Another one of those classic 11-hour Dr. Valentine lectures. The family, they act like they missed out. Look, you can make up for it, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Tap into this 11-hour demonstration. We are more than certain that the Bible will definitely be laying it out. Ironically, yesterday there was a major announcement by NASA about the research that they have been doing into UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. And not surprisingly, they came out and said, well, we observed some out of the 144 cases that have been reported, and majority of them can be explained and some of them can't, but we still have inconclusive um, ideas about what exactly is going on. So their report was no report. Um,
Yeah.
it seems like a super duper major distraction and a cover up. And once again, because of my teaching, my training, my observation, and my initiations, I don't believe anything that they say. Can you give us a little background information in regards to the beginning of Nassau? What were Nassau's origins and its beginnings? Where did it come from?
It started with the Nazi von Braun
Hmm.
and Operation Paperclip. That was
Yes.
actually the setup by the British and the Americans. They wanted the science that they had. In fact, the atomic bomb was actually being built by the Germans before the Americans got hold of it.
Right.
And so what they did was they attacked. There was a lot of subversive and covert operations that were going on during World War II,
Hmm.
and they got in contact with them and told the Nazis, especially the scientists, that it was inevitable that they were going to lose. What happened was the bankers pulled out of financing the Nazis, and so what happened is the Nazis were running out of the money. You remember that Hitler Schicklgruber was actually a Rothschild, and the upper echelon of the Nazis were actually family and kin of the international bankers who actually set up the Federal Reserve System.
Hmm.
So it was pretty much a nepotistic thing with these Nazis in war and so forth. And you got
Right.
to remember too, the Germans, the Queen of England is a German.
Yes.
You have to understand that most of the so-called Windsors, they
Yeah, we
took on
broke
the
that
name
down.
of Windsor Castle after the Coates,
Coxburg, right. Right.
Habsburg, or
Yeah.
Coburg,
Okay.
was the
Right.
ones who actually came over from Germany.
Bavaria. Right.
Right. So what happened then is they put it out to it. First of all, Hitler was flown out. A female pilot flew Hitler out of Germany, and he migrated to South America, where he went to first to the Vatican. They call it the Vatican rat lines, where they were bringing in the Germans and the Nazis. And Hitler learned the superficial mass, the mass that the Catholics do, which I was dealing with as an altar boy back in my days. So at the what they did was they had him be a priest in a small enclave in South America. I believe it was in Argentina. After that, they brought him over into where he lived until about 104 years of age. He lived in Baltimore, right outside of Washington, D.C. And most people don't know that. But in the interim, they began to take and get Nazis out of Germany, and it was a scramble to get the Nazi scientists who had advanced technologies. And so Russia and the United States began bargaining for who they wanted. And himself, von Braun himself essentially went to the United States of America where he set up NASA. Now you got to remember too that the Ashkenazim were very heavily involved in the Nazi Party as well. And the thing about it was that the setting up of what do you call it, NASA or NASA was actually Nasi, or it was taken from the so-called ancient Hebrew, or the so-called what do you call it, the Hebrew alphabet again, the gematria. It was taken
Yeah.
from the gematria, and it meant illusion. Okay, so NASA was set up essentially based on to bring von Braun, who was the king of the rocket science at that time, to bring him and his entourage of over what it must have been about 113, which essentially came over in the rat lines and set up the Nazis. In fact, one of your presidents of the United States, um, George Scherf, was the Hitler Youth, and he was the one who essentially was sent over to monitor Tesla's work. In fact, Tesla was the one who gave him a nickname. And you ever see that cartoon with the little monkey? I forgot the name of the little monkey. And
Curious George.
Curious George. That's
Yeah.
Curious George was George
So
Sher.
you're talking about George Bush with George
George
Sher.
Bush.
So
Yeah, George Sher. Yeah.
you
And
explain,
so
you know,
he what happened was, when since he was working with Tesla, the word is that there was a guard, a one of the personal guards of Hitler. His name was Stempfler, not Stempfler. Stempfler was the one who wrote Mein Kampf. Stempfler was the he was the Jesuit priest who wrote Mein Kampf for Hitler. And so what happened, if you're looking at the situation where they began to create NASA and to infiltrate through the CIA. CIA again was set up with by the Vatican, and so you have to understand that everything that you're looking at today was actually a mending and a blending of the Nazis, who essentially came
right,
over here and set up with George Scherf. You notice that George Scherf became the head of the CIA.
yeah,
You
right.
see, it's all connected
Because
together.
I was gonna speak about Prescott Bush, and then I was gonna speak about OSS
Yeah.
being precursor to
Mhm.
CIA, and
Yeah.
how all of this always ties in. The dope always seems to find itself tied in somehow, because that, of course, is the black. That's the funding, right? So that's the black ops. Prescott Bush was running opium
Hmm.
um, during the when the British had the opium running out of China, as you explained, and we've done the research and corroborated all of this information. That's where the skull and bones comes from.
Hmm.
All of that Yale money, and then his son, who later on becomes George Bush, becomes the head of the CIA. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Then, ironically enough, they start dabbling the coke. You know what I'm saying? And then they show you, we could even go further back to the French Connection, when the Americans made the deal with Lucky Luciano in the 40s, right? For the troops to go up through the back of North Italy. And then they had to make the deal with Lucky Luciano, because Lucky Luciano had to tie to the mobsters in Italy.
They
He
ran the
made
ports.
yeah, he made that possible. And then they turned over the dope trade to him through the French Connection and said, we're going to turn our backs. They showed that in Godfather of Harlem, when they brought over the 100 keys of dope.
Hmm.
And then our people been on the doozy